Hey, thanks for watching. Today we're going to talk about bulk estimates. Bulk estimates are required, or scaling your estimation is required when you need a large amount of work to be estimated quickly. That could be in a couple of things. Number one, it could be in the form of your backlog that just you haven't seen in a long time and you want to quickly just get a sense of how much of work is left in your backlog. Or you have a request that requires quick, immediate response that you need to estimate for sizing, for timing, etc. So I'm going to be covering a couple of those techniques and a couple of cautions as well. And then the big question near the end of the video is going to be, well, how do I then say when something is going to be done? Perhaps. If you like this topic and are interested in more videos like this, please hit the like button and hit the subscribe button as well. It helps promote the channel, helps others use these techniques, and helps me learn what others are interested about. So please take a moment to do that. As some of you may have seen on another one of my videos around just introducing story points as estimates. Let's say you're a team that has these building blocks in place and you use planning poker to do estimations. Bulk estimation is not very different. But let's just make sure that we have a common ground. The first thing is you use planning poker to do relative estimates in all of your backlog. The second is that you've been doing this for a little while, a couple of sprints even is fine, and your team is used to using relative estimations as a way of measuring. This is a key building block. And in another video you'll see down in the description, I've covered how to get started with planning poker and how to get started with story points. But this assumes that you do that. Now, a lot of you have your backlog may look something like this. This is what a good backlog looks like. If you're in a current iteration and you have a set of items that are in your backlog that are at the top of your iteration, at the top of your backlog. So you're working on these, they're broken down into small sizes and chunks. You can use any of these stories to actually start working on something. So you're working on this currently, and these are high priority items as you can see on the scale on the right. Well, then you have other items that are actually slightly longer outlook than just an iteration. So this could be for a release, this could be just in the next few iterations, or relatively lower on the priority list. And these things are things you may have estimated, may not have estimated, but in the large sense, you know what they're about, and you've actually estimated a higher amount of these as well. And then you have things that are just there in your backlog for a lower priority for another day, or they're deferred for many reasons. They're not required by the customer until a much later time, or these are things that you just don't know much about, but we know that we want to do something about these in the future. So your backlog is divided into these. That may be future releases. Bulk estimations really help if we need to figure out how to estimate a large number of backlog items all at once. So going back, it's to think about this level, anything between the release and the future. And it could be a subset of items within this future, or it could be all of them. That depends on your backlog and your situation, on what type of work you do. But that's something, that's what bulk estimations are really, really effective with, when your backlog looks something like this, if it were represented on a wall somewhere. So there are two scenarios here. What if we need to estimate features or large number of backlog items? The first scenario is you want to estimate a big chunk of your backlog, just so you know how much work there is left in your backlog. The second is you have a new request to estimate and respond to some sort of a requester, a customer need, or a feature idea that your team may have had that will really help the customer really with simplifying a process or something like that. All right. So there are two common ways to do bulk estimations with Agile backlogs. The first one is t-shirt sizing, and the other one is affinity mapping. T-shirt sizing, as the name suggests, is using our t-shirt size, small, medium, large, extra small, etc. And affinity mapping, if you just look at the definition of the word affinity, it means like items or things that are related in some sort of way that you cluster together. So we're going to be exploring both of those. Let's start with affinity mapping. So affinity mapping is an effective tool when we have a large number of ideas and a lot of data to work with. It helps us solve a complex problem. So sometimes it's about getting into the feature or the request, and you need to really understand what it is. So it helps you break down and cluster things. It's also very useful in a non-estimation context, but in general for brainstorming. And this is an idea that comes from a lot of UX UI design world, where they generate a lot of ideas and they start to make sense of it, especially when it comes to customer journeys and user experience design. Affinity mapping can also help you think outside the box. And this is when you want to throw up a bunch of ideas. That's the goal. And then you start to make sense of them afterwards. So we'll get into that in just a second. There are a few benefits of affinity mapping. One, it reduces groupthink. So this concept that, if two people think that this is a certain amount of size, or two people think a certain way, I'm just going to say yes, because I don't want to be singled out as the not in agreement one. Team alignment and sync. So the funny thing is that it actually sparks good conversation, good discussion to bring common understanding and synchronization within the team's thinking on what's expected here. The last is release and midterm planning. So this is really good for a slightly longer term horizon than your iteration, but not too far out. But it can be very good for something like a 6-month planning or 1-year planning, which if you're an agile team, you shouldn't really be doing that long phase of planning, but it can help with non-software teams with at least clustering and making sense of their ideas. So for silent sizing, what you're going to do is ask your team members to quietly look at the set of backlogs. So you would pick, let's say, the first feature or first set of related things to begin with. And you're going to say, all right, quietly in your own spaces, and you could do this virtually as well, order from the smallest to largest, order all these stories that you have within any given feature or any given work, broken down a little bit, and order them into smallest and largest. And people will just throw up what they think is the right thing to, right kind of sense of size across multiple stories within a feature. And what you're going to do then is that will be the around that all of you discuss together in this space, where you say, okay, why is story number 4 that much smaller than story number 9? Or I think story number 1 is actually really small because here's the information I have that can help with this. And that's why I rated it as smallest. So it creates a good discussion. It also, as someone facilitating this session, you're seeing what are common patterns, or at least things that the team is very clear about. For example, if majority of the people, if not all of them, put story number 8 at largest, it gives you a trend view that, okay, everyone believes this is large. Let's have a quick discussion about other items and focus on the items where there are more misalignment. And that helps with shortening and also focusing in the discussion on things we're not aligned on. Remember, this is a bulk estimate, which means these are things further out in your backlog that don't require you to do a perfect solutioning right now. So keep in mind that this is meant to have quick discussion and a quick alignment across the teams. Once you do this round, so this is just silent sizing, then the team comes together and discusses one row at a time, ideally, or one feature at a time is another way to look at this. And so you will have the first item, you'll have the second item, and then the third item, and so on and so forth. So this is how that you want to facilitate this type of discussion in the team. Going back for a second to items that require clarification. So as people will have discussions, or if they're not able to really say whether something is on the smallest side of the scale or on the largest side of the scale, they'll throw it up and need clarification. Now, it doesn't mean, of course, every one of these items needs clarification, but we want to set up the environment and a team to say, I really don't understand what this means. And only then something can go into the need clarification bucket. This helps with not having all the items there, but it also helps with people reminding the group that this is purely an explorative exercise. It's not an exact promise or prediction of any kind. Affinity maps can look like this in perhaps a non-software context. So you would start from the left with just generating a bunch of ideas that the group is coming up with. So this is a design exercise around content creation. Everyone just threw ideas. There's no good, there's no bad. It's just throwing up ideas all at once. It's a great way to generate a lot of ideas. So this is brainstorming. Then step number 2 would be to start to look at common things people said and cluster them or somehow identify them as higher affinity with each other. So affinity mapping. The third is to give them a label. So this is when we start to create larger themes around all the work. So we said everything here, well, what's the common term here on the blue side, for example? Well, that's delays. Okay, great. So that's how we're going to address items around anything to do with this topic is going to be labeled as delays, and it helps you organize your backlog as well. This is another example of affinity maps, where a group of people threw up a bunch of ideas around the shopping experience or the or supermarket experience, and they looked at things like, the value statement is I value convenience. So I'm also cost conscious. I like to eat healthy. So they've given very customer-centric titles to these affinity groups, and that is also something that's very valuable. It helps you keep the voice of the customer in the front. Whether you're a non-software team or a software team, it keeps the customer's voice very heavily in front of you when you start to label them in quotations of what a customer would say. You can use this in things like journey mapping and just understanding your general set of users as well. Couple of tips. Now this is taken from somewhere, but and not all of them may apply to you exactly this way, but a few tips. Number 1, affinity mapping works best when you limit your participation, so you want to keep it to a smaller group. It doesn't have to be 5 or 6. Your team may be bigger than that, but how do you keep it contained within this team? And you also don't want to spend too much time on investigation and things like that. So it's supposed to be a quick process. The process of ideation and grouping should be silent, and so don't talk about it. This is an important thing. People need silent time to think and be critical. And there are a couple of benefits of this. Number 1, they can actually think and be critical. The second is that if you have folks in your team that are introverts or generally on the quieter side, they're not comfortable speaking up, it allows them to provide input into this process as well. So it's a very inclusive process if you by keeping it silent. If you have fewer than 15 data points, affinity diagrams may not be necessary. What this really means is that if you have a small set of items to do, whether it's in a software or other context, if you have a small set of items to do, you don't need to do affinity mapping. Just go through them one by one. It might be simpler to do it that way. And don't overthink groupings. Just go with a gut instinct. This is, again, an explorative exercise that helps you understand the relative size of things in your backlog. All right. That's affinity mapping. Now let's talk about t-shirt sizing. T-shirt sizing is something you may have heard in a lot more about than affinity mapping, but I wanted to set the stage on where is it slightly more effective or beneficial as you proceed. So if you have a large number of items to estimate, that's why we're here, requests that have low detail and time sensitivity to inform prioritization. Affinity mapping generally there is not much of a time horizon, although you could take an affinity map and then superimpose some sort of t-shirt sizing as a scale. But t-shirt sizing really helps with the combination of things that you don't know much about, but they're also immediate and time sensitive. So you're not exploring, you're a little more focused on informing prioritization and relative size. And it can help you quickly identify where to start with larger work. So I'll talk about the scale in just a second, but it'll really help you know where to get started. Where's the small size we can get started with? Well, a couple of benefits. Sparks healthy discussion. That's the same for affinity mapping, but this one, it jumps into the discussion. There's a lot less silent sizing here. Team alignment and sync, which is a key benefit that is really good with both of these estimation techniques. It helps to reduce wasted time on low priority items. So very quickly, when you start to talk about items that, oh, this is not important, let's just throw it somewhere, or let's not even talk about it, let's go to the other high priority items. And it requires light facilitation. There are a lot more tools out there now that people can use, but even then, even if simply setting up a whiteboard or a physical session somewhere, it's very easy to throw up items to do t-shirt sizing. That in Affinity Mapping as well, but Affinity Mapping may require a little more structure and more ground rules to create before you start t-shirt sizing. A couple of cautions, and this is from people that are very experienced in the industry, like Mike Cohen and other coaches and mentors. T-shirt sizes are, because they're not quantitative, are not additive either, which means we can't say small plus medium equal a large or anything like that. So there's no way to add it up to then do some calculations if you need to. The second thing is, it can be confusing for some like larger sizes. For example, in my mind, an XL is maybe 25% larger than a large, but in other folks' minds, it may be double the size or triple the size, whatever. So sometimes that can be confusing to relate with each other. So there are two ways to address the non-quantitative nature of t-shirt sizes. And you may have other ways. These are just two ways I'm going to cover today and talk about. The first one is you relate sizes to some set of story points. And you could do this right from story to features. And or you relate sizes and sprints together. So you get a sense of how much work something might be and would we require more or less sprints. So let's talk about sizes and story points first. What you could do, choose to do as a team. I've just provided one example, but you can talk about what makes sense for your team. Is you could say anything that is less than 2 story points is extra small. Anything between 2 to 5 is small, medium 8 to 3 story points, large is somewhere between 20 to 60, and extra large is 100 or more points, or anything really that is really big will just go into the extra large bucket. There isn't much value in adding any more sizes. You may also notice I added extra small. It's good to have that slightly smaller size to give you a little bit of a scale to work with. And this is from experience purely, so feel free to experiment with this. Keeping in mind, I've again used the modified Fibonacci series. You can use another modified series or not modified series, up to you. Fibonacci works really well. So just one little tip. This method works really well when you have a bunch of stories and epics. So your backlog is a little more focused, where you don't have too much variance in sizes. So you may have something that is a small story or a large story or an epic or a feature that is larger encompassing, but you don't have anything bigger than that. And generally, you've done a healthier job of managing your product backlog to look like that iceberg. All right. So in the case of size and sprints, you could choose to similar to points, but this time you're putting in the context of sprints. So the one thing is, this is really good for when you have requests, a lot of requests coming in for estimation of varying sizes, something from large to medium to small and all kinds of sizes that may be coming to you. This method can work really well when you're doing high-level product or high-level items. So you could say extra small is something that we can do within a sprint, just a gut feel again. And small is something between 1 to 2 sprints, and so on and so forth, up to anything that'll take more than 12 sprints is extra large. And now in here, this assumes a 2-week sprint, but the same concept could apply, and you can adjust these based on what your sprint length is or iteration length is. What if there are features that come to you? And so these are stories and things that are slightly bigger than stories, as in stories that haven't been broken down generally. But what about features? And what about if you haven't actually, if you don't have time to break down the work within a feature to really understand it enough to estimate it at a high level and do bulk estimations? Well, there's a simple tip for that. Just total up the recently completed feature that you did as a team, or recently completed work. So how does that work? So this is the scenario. Hey team, please estimate how long this new feature will take to complete. We need a timeline on this. We've had a previous feature that we totaled up because of the number of user stories we've estimated in the past, and you don't have to re-estimate, just total them up. And then you don't have any stories yet, and you don't have enough time to break down the estimate. What do? Well, you do this. You've been running in sprints, and every sprint you have a certain set of points that you burn, that you accomplish. And so over time, either you take an average of 3 or 6, doesn't matter. You take an average set of points that you are burning per iteration or per sprint. So you have that number, which is, in this case, in this example, 16 points on average. Well, let's say then we size this new feature that came to the team to be about 4 times as bigger than that feature in the past. So that feature was 24 points. This is about 4 times as big, so we give it 100 points. So you don't have any user stories, but you're just doing a general sense of, okay, what's required? Let's have a quick discussion. Let's look at what we had done, what was required in that previous feature, and then say, you know what, this is 4 times as complex to do. And so now it's 100 points that we estimated this feature to be, and we know our burn rate per sprint, and that's 16 points. So you do a simple math, divide 100 by 16, and you get about 6.25 sprints, but let's say around 7 sprints. So that's the rounding up a little bit. And so we focus on doing the work instead of documenting the work for an extended period of time until we actually have to work on it. But now you can use this to do a couple of things. 7 sprints does not mean you'll be done by 7 sprints. There may be other constraints in your work. We have a lot of dependencies. We, as a company, we do 1 or 2 sprints of just user acceptance testing or something like that. Add that extra time to this. So if it's it's 7 sprints but 2 sprints because this is our process that for change approval, etc. that will take before we can actually put it in production. Great. So you now say it's going to be 9 or 10 sprints to accomplish this feature and to put it in the customer's hands. You're going in with openness and honesty and saying, this is a super high level estimate. We haven't broken down the work. We're purely estimating it compared to, based on information we have relative to work we've done in the past. And we're looking at our velocity that we've seen an average of in the last few sprints. Our velocity could go up, it could go down for various reasons. But this is just an estimate today. 2 sprints or 3 sprints from now, when we start working on this, our estimate will adjust and it will change, and you will get a more realistic timeline. But that's the openness we go in with, and we set expectations with our stakeholders or requesters, what have you. So that's bulk estimations. We've covered a couple of things. We've covered affinity mapping, t-shirt sizing, and then what if you're asked for an actual date? Knowing that you don't know enough, knowing that you are going to be transparent about what went into the calculation and what you know so far. Please like, subscribe, and comment for any thoughts or disagreements or ideas you have for not only about bulk estimations, but any other video in the future. Now check out these videos for more Agile related content.